Welcome to another spine-chilling episode of AskReddit Stories. Tonight, we're diving into the darkest corners of Reddit, where people share their most terrifying encounters with the paranormal. From eerie whispers in empty rooms to shadowy figures lurking in the night, these first-hand ghost stories are sure to send shivers down your spine. Dim the lights, settle in, and prepare yourself for the horrifying tales you won't soon forget. Let's get started. You/deleted responded LVE posted this before on a similar AskReddit question. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago after a long fight with cancer about a month before my wedding. I saw her the day before she passed, but due to work I wasn't at the hospital the day of and was pretty upset about it. After her funeral I dreamt I was at my parents' house, but in the dream it was my friend's house. He was saying to me how there are lots of ghosts in the house, and at that point there's a knock at the door. There's a lead light window by the door and I see an outline of a small lady in a purple wool coat, something my grandmother wore before she was admitted to hospital. I walk to the door and open it to see her standing there. I ask her how she is as I'll unlock the door and I wake up. At this point I'm completely shaken. I get up to get some water and just process what I dreamt. After about 20 minutes I go back to bed and eventually after about an hour fall asleep and begin dreaming from the exact point before I wake up where I unlock the door and see her standing there holding a plate of my favorite food that she would always make whenever I or she visited. I hug her and ask her how she is and she says she's fine and not to be sad because everything is going to be okay. I tell her that I love her and miss her, give her one last hug and then I wake up. At that point I feel happy, but when I try to tell my wife what I dreamed I completely break down, mostly at the fact that even my dream she brought me a plate of my favorite food. It's hard to explain, but the dream felt extremely real at the point where I saw and spoke to her. Prior to that, when speaking to my friend, it felt like a normal dream. If she did visit me, I'm so glad I got one last chance to say goodbye. You/Icebox253 responded. Oh man, my time to shine. So Elle used to rent a townhouse in the woods with my ex. One night I'm out on duty when she calls me at about 3 in the morning, absolutely hysterical. I'm thinking, oh my god, somebody broke in. I got to race home and help, but it seems the wooden baby gate we used to keep the puppy downstairs flew from the base of the stairs. The way up the stairs, hit the ceiling, leaving a mark, and landed in a mangled mess. The puppy was locked in her cage all night, so she couldn't have done it, and all the doors and windows were locked from the inside. Later that month we were in the kitchen having a chat when, in front of our very eyes, this big heavy feeder we used for the cat, which was on the countertop as LD just cleaned it, rotated 90 degrees upright onto its side, and then gently another 90 so as to be upside down. It barely made a tap as it landed. This feeder was heavy. When I tried to recreate this, it made a very loud crash. How could it rotate with only a tap? More crazy things happened too. I would enter the kitchen and then the silverware drawer would bang super loud. The animals would stare at a corner of the room and back away slowly. A dead-bolted door would be wide open as soon as you turned your back to it. Oh, and the nightmares, man, you would not believe. So, not saying I believe in ghosts, but damn bud. You/imaginary_medium responded. Years ago, my husband and I were trying to see if we could get a modest house by contract for deed. We took my sister along to look at the house. It still had someone's personal effects in it as though they had just stepped out, but was for sale. We walked all through and were hopeful. Suddenly, my sister said, "Wait, I know whose house this was. This house belonged to that guy my son knew who died in his kitchen. This was Tony's house." At that precise moment, a cabinet door shot open and whacked her on the backside. Never one to be rattled easily, she looked up and said, "Okay, Tony, I get it." We checked, it was indeed his house. The cabinet had been tightly shut, and the floor was stable. I've never seen a cabinet door randomly swing open with a force behind it like that. Not enough to hurt, but fast, as though a hand had whipped it open. You had to be there. I wish we could have gotten the house even if he was haunting it. He was known to be a nice guy, very funny, and we wouldn't have minded sharing it with him. You/Jellington Steele responded. When I was in college, I lived in an apartment complex. Every once in a while, at like 2 in the morning, I would hear breaking glass. It was clear as day when it happened. There was no doubt it was a window breaking. Never found any broken glass anywhere around the apartment. My younger brother would come out and party with us, and once or twice he came busting into my room, thinking someone was breaking in. Finally, one night, my girlfriend stayed over. She would kick and push in her sleep and at some point nudged me and I woke up. When I looked over at her, she wasn't asleep. She was sitting at the foot of the bed, facing away from me. When I said her name, she stood up and walked out of the room. Glass break. I looked around and realized that she was still laying next to me in bed. That was the only time I saw anything in that place but heard the sounds pretty consistently. You/deleted responded. Was babysitting my parents' friend's child. They were out for dinner and someone had to take care of the baby and I volunteered. I was about 11 to 12 at the time and wasn't that close to the baby. The house they lived in was very old, but had been refurbished to look nicer. It was around 7:30 when I put the baby to bed, then I was just chilling on the couch for an hour before I heard something. It sounded like floorboards creaking. It was around 8:30 now, but since this baby was no taller than a foot, it couldn't have been her. It was a single family house and the nearest neighbors were about 10 yards away. Nobody was home except me and the baby. I went upstairs to make sure the baby was okay, but she was sitting up in her crate just staring down a hallway through a separate door that was slightly creaked open. I went over to see what she was looking at. I opened the door all the way and a cold wind swept my ankles, no windows open and no ventilation in this hall, and what seemed like a figure's shadow creeped into the other room. I grabbed the baby, went straight downstairs, and locked her and I in a small reading room until around 12 p.m. when the parents came home. Never babysitting in a house from 1920 again. You/Catbur 1997 responded. I was raised a skeptic, so I tend to lean toward things having a logical answer, but there's been a couple instances I still couldn't explain entirely until recently. The most recent was hearing my cabinet door slam closed in the kitchen while I was in the bedroom. But before I moved to where I'm at now, I lived with my ex-fiancé at the time, and he would often be at work while I was home due to opposite schedules. So one of the times I was relaxing in the bedroom at night, my dog and I both heard this woman's voice, clear as day as if it were right outside my bedroom door, "Go GZ." So I panicked and listened for a bit and heard nothing else, went outside with the dog and saw nobody, then promptly told my ex what happened, and to lighten the situation a bit we named her Jeez Louise. Turns out though when I'm sleep deprived I get visual and auditory hallucinations super easily. So, pretty much any ghostly experience LVE had since then I just chalk it up to that. Edit. Just gonna put this here, dogs can sense chemical changes super well, so I doubt my dog actually heard anything. He likely reacted to my adrenaline rush before I even had a chance to process what happened. You/Yander_Matrix responded. I decided to take a nighttime stroll sometime between 12 to 1 a.m. range and left my apartment. I walked along the road that led to the woods nearby and contemplated on whether to follow the road that led through the woods. I decided against it as I wasn't stupid and it was pitch black with zero lights and only able to see a few feet in front of you. So L decided to head back home. I barely walked 15 feet from the woods and I heard footsteps directly behind me. I turned and seen no one and it continued every time I started walking back. Problem was there was no hiding spots for someone to hide if they were following me and the footsteps sounded like they were only 2 to 3 feet at most away. I also used to watch those haunted house reenactments, so what I got from those was that ghosts react to fear, so if it was some spirit I shouldn't act scared. So instead I laughed when I heard the steps again. This time it seemed to stop. I got home and went to bed and that same night I was woken abruptly about an hour later to a guy saying PSST. I looked around and no one was there, so I just said aloud, "Not right now. I am trying to sleep," and went back to bed. Thing is, if it was just the second thing I could explain it off, but they happened same night so it feel like they were connected. It was one off as it never happened again, otherwise I would have went to get checked out lol. You/power_wiz_IV responded. I grew up in the backwoods of Missouri, our nearest neighbor about a half-mile away. His wife tragically passed away and he ended up moving, and his house, a collection of several prefab trailer homes connected by some elaborate porches, and stayed empty for a few years while he tried to sell it. He paid my family to mow the yard every week and generally keep an eye on the place to protect it from copper thieves and break-ins, and being a teenager I got put on mowing duty. The place was creepy, and being around it alone in the muggy summers the first always expected to see someone staring at me from the empty windows. Eventually I got up the nerve to go poke around and see if I could look inside. Nothing nefarious, just curious. All the doors were locked except one to a kind of shed at the back that just seemed to be jammed. I was able to get it open and saw that it had been blocked with a rock from inside. As the door swung open I saw, hanging from a rafter in the center, what I immediately thought was a corpse. Turns out it was an old dress military uniform, jacket, pants, etc., hanging from a clothes hanger on a rope in the dead center of the room. The air was dead still, hot and humid, but I got chills as I pushed the door open more and saw the uniform slowly and deliberately turn in my direction, pause for a moment, and then turn its back on me again. I closed the door and bolted back to my riding lawn mower and didn't go back there for a few weeks. When I did get the nerve to try the door again, it seemed like the rock was back in place. I didn't bother it again and the house sold the next year. U/Radel_Annuin responded. I moved into an old farmhouse, probably built in the 40s. The door up to the attic was off of the main bedroom and had a bunch of locks on it. In the attic was an incredibly dusty bed, and there were snake skins draped everywhere. I'm not kidding, like 100+ snake skins. The main bedroom was under the attic room, and after moving in, I would wake up at night because I could hear a marble being rolled back and forth, over and over. There were a lot of locks on the outside door to the main bedroom and on the door to the outside, where you had to have a key to unlock it. I had a traveling job at that time, and every time I left, the light bulbs blew out. I had to replace the bulbs each time I came back. Could have been faulty electric, but electricians said everything was fine. My theory is that someone was locked up in that room for being insane or criminally insane, and never let out and died up there. U/Promenbound responded. I'll preface this story by saying I don't believe in ghosts, and still don't even following this experience, but it was quite a good one nonetheless. I was working a night shift in an old, residential building and lots of the other night staff had eerie ghost stories. My colleague and I were drinking coffee in the office area and she was sharing them all with me. I was trying to explain to her while, despite these making for entertaining spooky stories, there are rational explanations and ghosts are illogical and non-existent. She was having none of it, and upping the ante on her stories in terms of numbers of witnesses, the good character of those who saw it, etc. etc. She then also confessed her anxiety that my skepticism would anger the ghosts and make them manifest. I laughed and said I hoped they'd bring it on. She was telling me off, and looking genuinely afraid, so I dropped it. Later that night, we did our walk rounds together and out of nowhere, the TV in a side room flipped on right as we walked past. The TV was at full volume, blaring static on no channel. My colleague flipped out and started screaming, convinced this was proof of the ghosts and LD angered them. I turned the TV off using the remote that was lying there on the table. No one else was around, and I couldn't come up with an explanation for why it suddenly came on just as we came by. She had her proof, which I couldn't debunk, and despite my skepticism I got a bit of a jump scare, which probably was karmic in light of my attitude to her beliefs. But yeah, still don't believe in ghosts, but that moment got me close. Thanks for watching, everyone. Like and subscribe for more videos like this one. If you enjoyed this video and want to dive even deeper into our community, consider becoming a channel member. Members get exclusive perks like early access to videos, custom emojis, shoutouts, etc. And it's a great way to support the channel so I can keep bringing you the content you love.